Welcome to Behind the Blue. I'm Cody Kaiser with UK Public Relations and Strategic Communications. On our last episode, we spoke with 3 UK students about their transition to an online format in order to finish the spring 2020 semester due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. This week, as we are in the process of forming and finalizing our tentative fall restart plan, we're talking with 3 UK faculty members about their experiences from this spring, tips for making the online experience work, advice they might give to other faculty or students, and more. Lou Hirsch is a lecturer in the Department of Plant Pathology and the Director of Undergraduate Studies of Agricultural and Medical Biotechnology and Agricultural Individualized Curriculum in the UK College of Agriculture, Food and Environment. Renee Kaufman is an assistant professor in the College of Communication and Information, specifically in the School of Information Science. And Darshak Patel is a senior lecturer of economics and the director of undergraduate studies at the UK Gatton College of Business and Economics. Thank each of you for being with us this week.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So the first thing I want to ask, and any of you can jump in on this as we go, but when the decision was made, and I should point out, we were talking about this before we recorded, Renee, actually, all of your classes were online this past spring to begin with. So you are already in that space to start with. But when the decision was made to move classes to an all online format for Lou and for Darshak, how were you feeling at that moment? I mean, had either of you had online classes before, and kind of when that decision was made, what was your reaction to that?
I can go first. In my scenario, I teach around 440 students in one class, and I had seen what other universities were doing. So what I decided to do early on, before the university made a decision, I made it optional for students to either come to class or watch me live over Zoom, just to kind of get the hang of it and see how the students would respond to it, how receptive they would be, and what changes then I could implement over spring break to move towards that direction. What I really learned and helped also was keeping things consistent as they were pre-COVID and during COVID, and then be very organized. Having 440 students, I wanted to minimize the amount of emails that were coming through and reducing the time that they could be spending learning the material as well. So the transition wasn't too bad because I have really supportive colleagues and we talk to each other constantly. And a colleague, Gail Hoyt, and I worked together quite a bit and figured out what would be the best way to counter this. And we realized that, hey, it's going to be very difficult to request a lot from our students in terms of buying a webcam. We do not know what kind of background or what kind of situation they're going to have when they go back home. So what we did was first we readjusted the grades, where we reduced the grades on exams and upped the grades on homeworks so that they could consistently read the material and answer those questions. And then another thing I'd like to do is usually have in-class participation and through responseware, but which was going to be difficult. So what we did was so I teach Monday, Wednesdays from 3 to 4:15. I decided every Monday and Wednesday at 10 a.m. I'll release a lecture. So I'll record it voice over PowerPoint in short segments, release the lecture. Students had 24 hours to review those and answer a 5-point quiz within 24 hours to again help make them a little bit accountable for their class performance. So in short, that's the transition I took.
Yeah, and then so my teaching duties are a little bit different than Darshak. So where he has a 500-person class that I wouldn't even begin to think how to do well. I have 2 smaller classes. One in the College of Agriculture, it's a freshman level technical writing class with 60 students, with a lab component, which is a little bit of a curveball for this online thing. And on the other side of the undergraduate spectrum, an undergraduate capstone class for graduating seniors in our agriculture individualized curriculum. And I don't know how well this next statement will generalize across other colleges, but I know especially in the College of Ag, we pull a very diverse student body from across the state, including Eastern Kentucky. And I know just through conversations with students, but also during spring break and during our first week of online learning, that some of these students, did not have internet at their house, or it wasn't dependable, or they had 10 family members at home, maybe a little hyperbolic, 4 or 5, and they had very low-speed internet, so they just couldn't reliably be around when their parents were, say, working, their jobs remotely for money. Some students conveyed to me that they couldn't attend class during our normal time, which I did host online live, because they would have to drive into town to steal Wi-Fi from the McDonald's or Wendy's. That was their most dependable access to the internet. So with that being said, for my undergraduate class, I elected to do an asynchronous model, which for the listeners out there who may not be into all of our jargon, is I did record it live, but I also posted those recordings and had the students, gave them the option to, if they couldn't make it live, follow up on their own time. And all of my stuff was due Sunday at 11:59 from the week. I did incentivize attendance because I think one of the values of both the College of Agriculture and UK in general, being a residential institution, is this face-to-face learning model. There's lots of merits to online instruction, and I think that's kind of where the world is going largely now. But I think people learn better face-to-face as people. And something that was very important for me as an instructor was to continue to offer at least that live back and forth discussion based model that I rely on, which was a hard shift for me because I need to read the room. If I was a stand-up comedian, I'd be called a sweat act. I just kind of pour it out there like one of those TV preachers, wiping my brow all the time. And that of course is diluted digitally. And I found too that, and I know that many of my colleagues have shared this, that a lot of folks, students didn't want to talk very much, or it really made the conversations harder. And I have a discussion-based class. And for the freshman class, it was, they were just kind of towing the waters of independence and then had to go back home with their families. A lot of their classes were moved fully asynchronous, so there was no live lectures. And for a lot of my students, my class was the only one with a live component, which they really appreciated because it gave them something at 11 o'clock of 3 days a week to tune into, kind of a pivot point. For my seniors, they were undergoing a lot different issue because they were entering the worst job market in the last 80 years. And they had other issues too, such as leases, with their names on them. And a lot of students, they didn't get that break that on-campus students got. I mean, UK reimbursed housing, but if you had a lease in a private property, like most upperclassmen do, they were left hanging on that and they got fired from their service jobs, and it was very difficult for them to kind of plot a path forward. And I co-taught this with our associate dean for instruction at our college, Carmen Margaritas, and she was very good in just talking to the seniors and just getting a sense of what they're doing, which I know they appreciated because no one, I think prior to that, had really taken the time to just figure out where the students are at. Everybody, I think, was kind of running around crazy trying to triage stuff. And because of the nature of our class and the small class sizes, we were able to kind of take a step back a little bit and check in, where I think that is extremely difficult to do with some of these larger programs.
I'm guessing too that, like, when you have a lab, for example, where you have students that are getting hands-on experience with actual lab work, like, that becomes very, very challenging. You can't replicate that necessarily in a virtual space. And I think there's probably something that is to be said about preparing the student mindset to be kind of ready to engage in a different kind of way. And Renee, maybe you've got some experience in that, as far as, like, it's one thing to sign up for an online class and know it going into it. How do you kind of accommodate that student mindset to help them bridge that gap, to know that they're not going to have access to certain things in a particular way?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So since I focus on communication, that can answer that. So a lot of times what I do and what the literature would suggest is to set up a communication plan with your students, and to also make sure that you are upfront, just very clear with your expectations, with your directions for assignments, with your rubrics, to have all of that accessible to them right up front. I know that with every online class that I've taught, and the first online class I taught was back in, I think, 2011 here at UK. And, I've learned a lot since then. And, it really just comes back to that communication piece for me. Making sure that in every video that I do, when I start a class, that video is, hey, here's what you're getting into, and here are my expectations, and here are some things that you need to consider when you take a class online. So, for example, I let my students know that I'm going to communicate with them on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday pattern. And so Monday, I debrief what the week's going to look like, what the content's going to look like. On Wednesday, I post anonymous questions that the students will send me, and then I make those available to everybody, because, just like in a face-to-face class, if someone has a question, usually there's a couple others that have the same question. And then on Friday, I just do a overview of, don't forget to do this, or don't forget to do that, and have a great weekend. So I have that rapport piece included as well, so that they are getting a sense of who I am, and that I care, and that I want them to be successful. And just like was mentioned by Robert, asking the students what they need. That's another thing that I do. I'll have my students kind of fill out a survey, an anonymous survey that lets me know what their learning needs are. And that way I can make sure that I'm there to help them be successful. Because if they've never taken an online class, chances are they have some kind of preconceived notion of what it looks like or what it should be. And I want to help reduce their uncertainty and give them the information they need to be successful.
Is there a sense of loss that students or even faculty experience when I think that you could probably look at it in this spring semester as this abrupt change, and there's a sense of loss of not having that, the ability to complete a class in a physical space, especially if you're a graduating senior, or if you're a faculty member who has students that you've had for several years and they're graduating. But even if you're not having to change, if you've just taken an online class, is there a sense of loss that students may feel or faculty may feel of not being in that physical space, and certain things that you just miss out on?
I can go. I think when I talk to students, as a director of undergraduate studies, I get to talk to a lot of students who are graduating, and I've had them over the years. And then I think I had a few students who are graduating in my class who was very difficult to get to know them, because I have around 440 students. Just understanding that I was feeling a little bit lost and a little bit down for not being able to engage with my students in person. I can only imagine what they were going through, maybe 10 or 20 times more. And so it was important as a faculty member for me to understand that and realize that, and find ways to engage them. And just like Robert and Renee said, finding that way to engage with them in a live session. I did show up on Zoom live every Monday, Wednesday at 3:00, whenever regular class time is, for students to come by and talk to me. It can go on about anything to do with schoolwork, to something that's going on in their personal lives, and so on. But what else I did was I created a discussion forum on Canvas, not to do anything with school, but just to let your steam off. So one day it was all about, hey, what advice would you give to students or your peers if you want to relax? Another one was, hey, let me get to know you better. Let's do 2 truths and a lie. I got to know so many of my students that way, then I would have even gotten to know them in a large setting. So that was a positive takeaway from that. But on the other side, just because I have a lot of students who follow me on Twitter, you could see the frustration in their voice or in their tweets about how they're going to miss out on this wonderful celebration of their 4 years at University of Kentucky. And I think a lot of colleges stepped in, a lot of faculty stepped in and created short videos of a celebrative video showing that how much they value them and how much we value of their success, and we continue to celebrate them in the future. I think students appreciated that, and it wasn't the best substitute, but it probably filled up a little bit of that hole.
Yeah, I think a lot of my comments echo Darshak. I'm the director of undergraduate studies of two programs that combined are less than half of the enrollment of Darshak's one class. So due to the nature of that sort of difference, I'm able to get to know my students a little bit better, although still 250 is a lot. You know, I think your question was Cody, was a good one about like the sort of emotionality of a digital shift like this. And I know the students were hurting, but I was hurting too. And I think any good teacher, this is a job, obviously, but I think what separates people who just do it for a paycheck and people who are passionate about it is a real, just their heart's in it. My heart's in it. And I know that the class before spring break, we were getting into this sort of wide-ranging, the gloves come off class-wide discussion about these really sensitive bioethical issues. And it was great. And I left that class going, all right, you know, the next 8 weeks are going to be solid. This is a good group of students. This is going to be great. And then the guillotine came down and it punched me. And I'm not a very emotional guy, but it took me a couple of days of kind of thinking about it. Like, oh man, this is why I'm so down. It's because we had a really good thing going that's now going to be less good just due to the nature of not being face-to-face, because that's how I think most honest discussions happen. But just like how Darshak is really involved with his digital presence to reach out to students, we were at a basketball game together a couple months ago, and his Instagram was blowing up because his students saw him out there and he was showing that to all of us. I'm not quite that savvy, but I mean, my students can reach out to me digitally most of the time, and they do. And I think that they got a lot of comfort out of just knowing that we were here for them. And I tried to share with them too my stressors. I think a lot of times faculty students maybe think faculty are these sort of just, you know, pillars of stone, you know, that just dispense knowledge, and we're very human. And it was a challenging time. My wife's also a faculty member here. We have a 2-year-old son. I know people with any children, there were struggles every way with kids coming home and having to work at home and all this stuff. But I think a 2-year-old comes with a very specific set of stressors. And I try to just be honest with my students too. Like, listen, I didn't have a good night and I'm going to give it my best, but my tank's 80% full this morning. So please, you know, roll with me. And I think they were very appreciative of the honesty.
I have a 14-month-old, so I totally understand that.
Oh, I don't look fondly back at those times.
Let's talk a little bit about resources available to like you're talking about this emotional aspect and how it's not just an impact on students, but also on faculty. And Darshak talked about, you know, people in his college who were able to provide resources and help. What kind of support are we seeing across campus? And I'm assuming that even like crossing over from one college to another or one department or another, what kind of support and resources do we see that are available to assist faculty as they kind of move through into this kind of new space?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. I want to give a shout out to CELT. I think they did a great job with compiling information and putting it in a centrally located place where all of us could go and tap those resources. I know that myself and one of my colleagues, well, several of my colleagues, made videos that were posted on that site. Just the video that I did with my colleague was just basically how to get your class online ASAP, right? And there were other resources on there too that I was able to look at, even though my class was already online. I could still go there and look at what other people were doing and saying. And I thought that was extremely helpful and accessible. So I really appreciate them for doing that.
I would say that one thing we learned a lot from this is there's a huge community that was formed within the Big Blue Nation, I would say. I think in our college, we created a Canvas shell for everybody to follow and have lots of discussion formats and lots of instructions on how to either give an exam remotely or make a video and so on. And everybody was willing to help. And so I could see a community being built to be there for each other and be supportive of each other. And I saw that at the University of Kentucky, it was really, really touching to see that happening. And it was also a connection being made between different colleges, Gatton College and Arts and Science, for example, and so on. So that was really wonderful to see as well. And it was also good to see students. We have Gatton ambassadors within our college. They even stepped up to the game, and they were giving us feedback in terms of, hey, faculty, you should be thinking about this as well, and so on. So that was really nice, because some of our faculty have never taught online. I taught once online 7-8 years ago, but it was a different experience, completely different experience. So that was really nice to see as well.
Yeah, and I to echo Renee's comment, CELT has been fantastic. They're a great group of people, and they've always been very helpful, but I think their value to the university has really shined during this time, because I think that they've been this excellent repository of somewhat untapped knowledge and capacity, because people have always been doing what they've done forever. And then, when we got this right angle shift, CELT was there, and they had the institutional capacity and the extremely patient staff to help with us. And just like how Darshak mentioned, his college stepped in with a Canvas cell, mine did the same. It really did, I think, mobilize a lot of kind of slow burning initiatives to get more online infrastructure, or to get older faculty members to use Canvas more. And it just accelerated what was already happening. So it's hard to say what sort of fruit that'll bear, but I think one benefit of this whole pandemic issue has been us being forced to, adapt to where we were already slowly trudging toward. And I think that'll ultimately be good for what we can offer, especially kind of in this national ecosystem of online and asynchronous classes, where, people could take it wherever they want to, as long as they have internet connection. We have to be good at that, in addition to everything else we already do super well.
When we get through this pandemic, and we will get through this, we just don't have a time frame that is set in stone. But once we move through this, what are some things that you think we will maybe bring along from this that will kind of maybe, I know that there are things that we will be glad to have back. I think the one-on-one conversations, meeting students in the hallways and having students drop by your offices and things like that, those are things that are definitely going to be welcome things that we get back. Being in classes and labs and being able to have that interaction. Are there things that you think we may take from this, though, from a technology standpoint or from a preparation standpoint, that maybe you feel like we will keep this even as we move back into a life after, managing COVID?
Yeah, I definitely see, the more that we explore online learning and use an LMS platform to send our content out into the world, the more people we can reach. So I think this makes us more accessible in a way, right? We are able to get to students and maybe who will not have the opportunity to come to campus, and now they do have the opportunity. They maybe always wanted to come to the UK, and being in Lexington just wasn't an option. And now I think that we've done this, we realize, okay, I see the pros, I see the cons, I know where I can work, I know where I can shine and where I need to work on. And again, I'm still able to reach a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. So I think that's one thing that we'll be able to step back from and say, now I can reach more people.
Yeah, I would say the increased capacity for digital connectivity with our students. I think that every generation of students is a little bit different, but I think this one especially has been brought up with Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They expect, and I think should receive immediate or pretty quick feedback, and I know that kind of goes counter to, I think, an older model of instruction with, rigid office hours and this or that. I stopped doing office hours years ago because over 5 years, I had one student come one time to office hours. So I don't know what percentage of time loss that is for me, but I mean, huge. But I've now find myself pushed in this direction, which I fully embraced, to be far more digitally available through Zoom meetings, group me chats, Instagram videos. And I'm one of these faculty who give my cell phone number out to students. And it's never once been abused. It probably will sometime in my career, but I think students really, really appreciate that openness to learn, because I'm never going to refuse a student if they have a legitimate question Saturday night and I have time. What's a 5-minute phone call if that helps them, do a better project or to make some sort of intellectual connection that they wouldn't have made before. And I think that just broadening out our concept as a faculty of like what student engagement means will help us capture this current generation of students who really need and expect that sort of 24/7 engagement.
Yeah, I kind of echo both Robert's and Renee's comments up here. First, with Robert's, in terms of engaging students digitally, I've written papers on how to engage students in economics using Twitter, Instagram, and what's the last one? And Facebook. I nearly forgot that one. But I moved on from that, and I made students do econ art and econ poems at the end of the semester to kind of relate the material they learn in class and apply to the real world. And so this time, because of pandemic, TikTok took off, and I asked my students to make econ TikTok videos as well. So again, trying to just keep them engaged and making sure that, hey, look, learning does not have to be within the 4 walls of a classroom. It can occur outside the 4 walls of a classroom. And that's why I want to echo Renee's comment on accessibility. One thing I really learned, and we already knew this, that the education platform is not equal to everybody. Accessible, also not accessible to everybody. And when this pandemic happened, we learned that these differences or the variations were huge. Some were easily able to come to class anytime you ask them to come, if it's a live version, or access the material anytime they want because they had really good internet connection, they had access to tutors. And some, they're probably sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with 10 individuals, limited Wi-Fi, like Renee had mentioned earlier. Some parents were really old, so they did not want their kids to come home. They put them in a hotel, and with a hotel that they couldn't really afford to pay a really expensive rate. So again, they had Wi-Fi issues, and we could go on with this example. So one thing we've learned that these differences in learning opportunities are wide and vary significantly. And one thing I'm going to continue doing now is continue recording my lectures, even if it's in person, and putting them accessible on my Canvas and making sure that everybody has equal access to them.
I want to be mindful of your time. I know we've talked about a lot of different things here. Hopefully, as we move towards the fall, we are going to attempt to have a normal, quote unquote, fall semester where we have students back on campus and we try to get back to business as usual as best as we can. The odds are, just as well as they are not, that we may end up having to make some changes again in this fall semester if we end up with, problems with coronavirus on campus, and we may see sort of a repeat of this. One of the things that I've heard a lot of people talk about as far as working from home or taking classes from home is the one piece of advice that's really stuck with me is this idea of making sure that you have a cutoff at the, you work as regular of a day as you can. So when it gets to, 5 or 6 p.m., that's the end of your work day and you go on and do something different. Because if you don't, people have a tendency to oftentimes they'll work until 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night and not think anything of it. And then you generate a large amount of burnout at that point. Last thing I want to ask each of you, kind of in mind of that, for students or for faculty, as we approach this, if there's 1 or 2 bullet points that each of you might have of things to think about as far as if we have to make this transition back to online again, what are some tips that you could provide that you would think of that would be the important things to think about when you move into this space?
I'll go first on this one. I think prioritize and protect things that make you happy. I know that both my wife and I, with being stay-at-home parents with my son unexpectedly for 3 months, that was not easy. And I know a lot of people have had it a lot worse, but it was not pleasant for us. And we were both, my wife and I both, upset, sad. It didn't help the process that we knew that was impacting our teaching. It was impacting all aspects because we couldn't do everything well. We were just doing everything as best we could, and that's not a good way to live a life. But I think with the sort of potential for a repeat of this fall with this second wave that at least our health administrators are predicting will occur, I will be more proactive in scheduling and protecting time that is just open. And that's for time around my natural household cycles of dinner and, putting my son down to bed, but also actually getting a little bit of time just, I don't know, for me to sit quietly on a couch with my computer down even, or just read a book or something. Because I think it's very easy, and any academic, I'm sure, could comment on mission creep and work-life balance issues. But you're right. I mean, we're all at home now, and we may be home for a bit at some point in the future. And I think you just got to be mindful of it and aggressively protect that time, because otherwise this job could be all encompassing and just eat you up.
I think that's a great point. And I want to add to that also to be mindful of the students, because I know a lot of them went from, as we talked about, went from taking all their classes face-to-face, and all of a sudden now they're taking 5, 6 classes online. And so I guess my points would be to just make sure you have a clear, consistent communication with your students, and just to be mindful that they're also juggling a lot too. And everyone just needs to take a breath and be patient. And yeah.
I think it goes back to both what Robert and Renee are saying, is being compassion. Show your compassion to both your students, your colleagues, to your family members. I think we all are going to get, we're going to conflict with each other, get in each other's way, and so on. And students, like Renee said, are juggling quite a bit. And in certain instances, they may not be able to provide the 100% effort they want to provide in education because of what's going on in the background. I think faculty need to continue being compassionate. One thing I really like to mention is, and I do not know if it's anything to do with University of Kentucky, but just in general, what I saw was happening in the world of economics when I seeing different faculty members putting down their feedback in terms of how they're moving to remote learning, is that they decided to up the game and increase the number of assignments because they think that that's how students are going to pay attention. And I thought that was 100% wrong. And it's basically forgetting about the idea that they have other things that need to be taken care of, either work or other classes and so on. So being compassionate is definitely a great tip I would give. And then being consistent. If you have any homeworks that are due every Sunday at 11:59, which I do as well, Robert, keep it consistent. Don't change it. Right? Don't throw in another curveball. There's no reason to do that, right? And so that's one way of keeping mindful of your students and understanding that, hey, look, I'm consistent, organized, provide great idea or feedback to my students. They will be hopefully 100% there and ready to go as well.
Well, this has all been really, really excellent. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you feel like might be important to touch on? I know we've covered a lot of ground here, but I want to see if there's anything that we haven't talked about.
Well, if I could just jump in real quick, and this has been kind of a passion area of mine, both because I'm married to a clinical psychologist, but as director of undergraduate studies of programs and administrator, I see student mental health being more and more of an issue. And I don't know the specific statistics, but it's something like 30 to 40% of incoming students have some sort of diagnosed or diagnosable mental health issue, whether that be anxiety, depression, or something more severe. And I think this situation, for many cases, exacerbates those underlying or upfront issues. And for the students out there who may be listening to this, or faculty members who listen to this, I would really encourage students to reach out to a trusted faculty member, and it may not be the teacher you have now, because not every one of us has a good ear for this sort of thing, but you probably know someone who will listen and who can direct you to some resources or just be there to talk to your peers. Students are incredibly savvy, and someone out there knows about the clinic in Frazee Hall. Someone knows about all these different mental health facilities around campus, but just don't suffer in silence. Talk to your faculty members, talk to your friends, reach out and get help. As I kind of cynically tell my students, this stuff's pretty expensive and your tuition money's paying for it. So you better take advantage of it, because in most cases it's free to you as a student.
I think that's especially important to point out in light of the increase in the amount of telehealth options that we have, that you don't have to physically be in a space to see someone, but you can do a lot of these things the same way that you're doing your online classes. And that is something that has increased, and I think has been a really, really good option for people, because oftentimes people just don't want to go somewhere. But if they have that chance to sit down and talk to someone one-on-one over their computer or over their phone, it works out much, much better. So yeah, very good point. I do want to point out, the last thing I want to say is that we mentioned CELT earlier, and for people who are listening that might not know, that is the UK's Center for the Enhancement of Learning and Teaching. They support teaching and learning, and they work with instructors to create environments in which students can excel, and they've been a big help through this process. If you want more information on CELT, you can find that at uky.edu/CELT. So just wanted to make mention of that. But in the meantime, Lou Hirsch, Renee Kaufman, and Darshak Patel, thank you, all three of you, so much for being with us on this episode. I feel like this was a really good conversation to have, and important information to get out to people. And we will look forward to the fall, and we will make the best of our situation, no matter how it turns out. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cody.